Hey friends, it's Lily. Today we're experimenting with something a little different on Truth is Stranger. We're still in that sweet spot of obscure but chilling, but this time we're talking serial killers. Not the overexposed names, not the ones with multiple Netflix series and Halloween costumes. We're starting with a case that sounds like urban legend and yet is painfully, precisely real: the Dallas Eyeball Killer.
Yeah, even the nickname sounds like a bad horror film. But this actually happened. It happened in a tight window, late 1990 into early 1991 in Oak Cliff, just southwest of downtown Dallas. 3 women, all shot, all left in public places, and in each of those 3 cases, their eyes had been removed. And there's also an earlier killing in 1988 that police linked to the same suspect.
Before we get into details, because details matter, we want to be crystal clear about the victims. These were real people with families, friends, histories. They weren't props in someone's mythology. Their names were Mary Lou Pratt, Susan Beth Peterson, and Shirley Williams. And before them, in 1988, Rhonda K. Bowie was found stabbed to death in the same general area. Police later came to believe all of it might be connected.
And it shook Dallas, not just because the crimes were so brutal, but because the killer was disciplined, efficient, no taunting letters, no grandstanding, no messy footprint pointing to exactly who did it. He left very little behind. The city didn't have a Zodiac. It had a ghost in a car.
You're already doing the noir narration, huh?
I know. It's the Oak Cliff ambiance. Night streets, headlights, old brick storefronts, and a task force losing sleep.
Okay, so let's set the stage clearly. We're in Dallas, Texas. The neighborhood is Oak Cliff and the adjacent stretches around it. The first murder that police later tied to the case happens in October 1988. A woman named Rhonda Bowie is found stabbed more than 20 times. And then there's a gap. 2 years of silence. Then, December 1990.
That's when the body of 33-year-old Mary Lou Pratt is discovered. She's been shot in the head. She's partially clothed. And when the medical examiner begins to examine her face, they realize her eyes aren't there. Not damaged. Removed. Deliberately.
Which is where the nickname comes from. It's awful and sensational, and it can erase the humanity of the victims. So we'll say this once and keep it to the minimum necessary. The eyes were missing in that December case and in the 2 cases that followed over the next 3 months.
Right. 6 weeks later, February 1991, 27-year-old Susan Beth Peterson is found not far from where Mary was discovered. She's been shot multiple times, including in the head, and her eyes are gone too.
Then, in March 1991, a third woman, Shirley Williams, is found near an elementary school. Again, gunshot wounds. Again, her eyes have been removed. The pattern is too specific to be coincidence. Dallas PD realizes they've got a serial killer who's operating within a very tight geography and timeline.
Crime analysts talk about offender signatures, things a killer does that aren't strictly necessary to kill, but which reflect psychological needs. In this case, the removal of the eyes is the signature. It's precise. It reads as someone who's confident enough to work quickly and who understands how to accomplish exactly that act.
And it terrified people. It terrified the women who worked that part of town most of all. There's this dynamic you see in so many cases. The people most at risk are the ones the city is used to overlooking. Street-level sex workers are targeted because their routines are visible, because they may not want police attention, because if they go missing, the search can start too late.
In Oak Cliff, the women knew someone was hunting. They started sharing descriptions of cars, drivers, license plates. And, this part matters, some of those women and a few neighborhood residents started passing tips directly to a rookie patrol officer named Regina Smith. She had just joined Dallas PD in 1990, and she took those conversations seriously. She walked the beat, listened, wrote things down. She became a central node for information.
This is one of those you catch serial offenders by listening stories. Regina Smith and other officers in Oak Cliff were actually hearing things. A certain older white guy, a carpenter type, a car that circled and circled and circled. The neighborhood grapevine started converging on a name, Charles Albright.
Albright lived in Oak Cliff. He was born in 1933, adopted as a baby, raised by a strict schoolteacher mother. He'd been bright as a kid, skipped grades. He'd also had this lifelong pattern of deception and petty crimes, forgery, theft, even faking diplomas and resumes. He could be charming and neighborly. He could also be predatory. In the early 1980s, he pleaded guilty to molesting a friend's teenage daughter. And this becomes important. When he was 11, his mother enrolled him in taxidermy lessons. The part that stuck with him? Eyes. There are reports from his adult life that he painted eyes, hyper-realistic eyes, again and again.
Which is, yeah, it's the kind of detail that feels like it was written for a movie, except it's documented.
So by early 1991, you've got a name, Charles Albright, floating around the beat. You've got similar crime scenes. You've got women telling police that this guy is out there cruising. And then you've got this rookie officer, Regina Smith, who is knocking on doors and keeping a log. She and other officers push the information up to detectives. A warrant is drafted, and on March 22, 1991, police arrest Charles Albright.
Albright's house is searched. There's no obvious bloodbath in the living room, no secret room with trophies. What they do find, according to reports, are hair and fiber traces and items that suggest a connection with the victims, like photographs and phone numbers. Enough to get a DA interested, not enough to close the book. The forensic era is very different from today. DNA is in its infancy in courtrooms, and a lot of cases still rest on microscopic hair and fiber analysis, ballistics, shoe prints, and the story that those traces tell.
Which sets up the trial. He's charged in multiple murders, but when proceedings really start rolling in late 1991, prosecutors keep one charge they feel the most confident about, Shirley Williams, and they let the others go before the jury ever hears them. So the state is trying to prove that Charles Albright murdered Shirley Williams, and they're using evidence that's largely circumstantial. Hairs that analysts say match, fibers that match, witness accounts that put him cruising the area. The defense raises doubts. Hair comparison isn't DNA, it's subjective. He's a familiar face on Oak Cliff, so of course people saw him. But in December 1991, the jury comes back, guilty of murdering Shirley Williams, life in prison.
And that's where this story becomes even more complicated, because Albright was never convicted in the other murders, even though police and prosecutors absolutely believed the same person did them. Later, some of the forensic evidence, especially the hair comparison, was questioned in the light of improved science. That doesn't mean he was innocent. It means the tools of that courtroom era weren't as definitive as we'd like them to be. What's not disputed is this: 3 women in 3 months were murdered in the same way in the same part of Dallas, and the city breathed out when Albright went away.
He maintained his innocence in letters and interviews from prison. He died behind bars in Lubbock in 2020 at the age of 87. And to this day, if you talk to the detectives who worked that case or to Regina Smith, you'll hear a mix of exhaustion and conviction. They believe they got the right man. And there's one detail that still haunts anyone who reads the files. The women's eyes were never found. If they were taken as trophies, no one ever located them.
Okay. Deep breath. You always tell me to breathe when we do the really heavy ones.
Breathe, Lily.
Thanks. I think the power of this case is that it's not a melodrama about a supervillain. It's a story about a man who blended in, who cultivated trust, who falsified qualifications and smiles and friendships, and who, if the jury got it right, used that access to hunt. And it's a story about people considered less than, who did the brave thing anyway. They kept working together, they paid attention, they talked to a cop who would listen.
Let's sketch each victim for a moment, without getting prurient. Mary Lou Pratt was 33. She was a known presence around Oak Cliff, liked by a lot of people who worked that stretch of road, and lived in the motels and apartments nearby. Susan Beth Peterson was 27, found in February 1991 on the same road Mary had been. Then in March came Shirley Williams. She was older than the others, a little outside the previous pattern, which sometimes happens late in a series. Offenders speed up, take risks. Her body was found near an elementary school in the early morning hours. All three of their names deserve saying. They anchor the facts.
Something that always hits me in these cases is how much invisible labor goes into solving them. Especially back then. The canvassing, the long hours watching a single street, the handwritten notes. Regina Smith walked that beat in uniform for 2 months when Mary was found. By the time Shirley is killed, she's the person people recognize and approach. She's 20-something, brand new, and she's the one who, in her own words later, just kept going back and back and back to the same doors until someone said, "Okay, here's a plate number."
And then a supervisor who doesn't brush that off. A detective who actually reads the notebook. A prosecutor who signs the warrant. It's unglamorous, but it's what moves a file forward.
There's also the way Place operates. Oak Cliff in 1990 is not the polished, trendy version you might know now. It's in flux. It's big and diverse, and it's had years of neglect. A lot of transient housing. That kind of environment lets a predator blend in. You can circle the block with nobody asking why.
And if there's a through line with Charles Albright's background, it's that he's a chameleon. The petitions and letters and interviews paint this picture of somebody who could be a good neighbor. You'd absolutely hire him to repair your roof. And also somebody who forged checks, stole gear, and lied about his credentials to get teaching jobs. He was early involved in a sexual offense against a friend's teenage daughter. He's a man who gets away with things because he seems like the kind of man who wouldn't need to. That dissonance is common in serial offenders, especially those who operate in their own neighborhoods without immediately getting caught.
The taxidermy detail sticks too, not because it explains anything. Lots of kids take weird hobbies and turn out fine. But because, in his case, there's this repeated focus on eyes. It becomes a motif in his life, and, tragically, in the murders. Investigators talk about it almost like a key that unlocks the psychology. Control, possession, anonymity. Remove the one feature that can look back.
You can hear people getting nervous in Dallas at the time. Newspaper clips from those months read like a ramping drumbeat. Patrol cars cruising Oak Cliff in pairs, women working in groups, refusing rides, writing down license plates. The crime scenes were fast. These weren't abduction to basement situations. The killer was choosing spots where he could pull over, take a single overruling action, and be gone in minutes.
And this matters. The city didn't treat it as a minor matter. There was a task force. The police chief did press. Patrol shifted resources. It would be easy to say, cynically, that nobody cared because the victims were sex workers. But from the accounts we have, a lot of people in law enforcement did care. A lot. And it was the women who kept pressing information into their hands who made sure that care stayed focused.
Let's talk trial for a minute, and we'll keep it clean. The prosecution's case leaned heavily on hair and fiber analysis, methods that were widely used at the time, later subjected to more skepticism as DNA became the gold standard. There were also witness accounts and a timeline that put Albright in the area, interacting with some of the women. For people in Dallas then, the conviction felt like relief. But it is true that he wasn't convicted for Mary or Susan, or the earlier 1988 stabbing of Rhonda Bowie, even though investigators believed the cases were linked. That's the uncomfortable lane we drive in with a lot of cases from that era. A strong pattern, a plausible suspect,
a conviction on one count, and a fog over the others that never fully clears.
Fog is the word. It's like you can almost see the whole picture, but there's just enough mist to keep you from saying 100% that's it.
And then there's a small heroism of sticking with the case after the headlines move on. Regina Smith stayed in law enforcement and eventually retired as a lieutenant. Detectives who worked those nights went on to other cases, but by their own telling, this one stayed in their heads.
Because how could it not? The whole thing is clinical and cold and contained in just a few months. And then it stops. The abruptness is eerie. There's no long cooling off pattern, no escalation into elaborate staging. It's like somebody slammed a lid on a pot. In this version of events, the lid is an arrest and a life sentence. And to be honest, if you were working those streets in 1991, that is what you wanted to believe, and probably still do.
Can I admit something, Lily?
Always, Connor.
I hate the nickname. I get why people use it. Eyeball killer is the term attached to the cases, and it's how you find the files. But nicknames can do two kinds of damage. They make offenders sound mythic, and they reduce victims to objects. The truth is stranger than those labels and also simpler. Somebody murdered Mary, Susan, and Shirley, very likely the same somebody. The police built a case against Charles Albright. A jury agreed on one, and the families have been living with that reality for more than 3 decades.
Same. And that's why we tried to do this one as a people story, not a monster story. When we say relatively unknown serial killers, we don't mean forgotten. We mean cases overshadowed by noisier ones. Oak Cliff remembers. The officers who worked the beat remember. The people who lived in those apartments in 1990 remember.
A thing I find instructive, too, is how narrow the geography was. Offenders who are comfortable in a location pick it for repeat offenses. They know the side streets, the visibility, the places to pull over without being noticed. Oak Cliff's layout, interlaced older roads, pockets of low light, motels near major arteries, gave a kind of cover that probably prevented more witnesses and more hard evidence.
This is also the part where we stress how science, timing, and luck shape outcomes. If these murders happened today, there'd likely be usable DNA in a vehicle, touch DNA on bindings or clothing, ring cameras on a dozen porches, license plate readers at intersections, cell site pings, maybe even a digital footprint of someone searching at 3 a.m. for a specific back road. In 1991, you had Polaroids and note cards and a lot of intuition.
And the rookie cop with a notebook, which in that moment was exactly the technology you needed.
Exactly.
I think one more thing is worth saying about the psychology here, carefully. The removal of eyes is often interpreted as an attempt to dehumanize a victim, or to take a keepsake that represents power and memory. You see academics talk about symbolism, windows to the soul, all of that. The truth is, unless you're inside the offender's head, you don't know. What you can say is that it's deliberate. It takes time. It's not impulsive cruelty. It's methodical. That's the signature.
And the signature is what connects the 3 murders of 1990-91. It's the thread that ties Mary, Susan, and Shirley together, and it's what turned fear into focus for the police. We're looking for one person.
If you're wondering about the 1988 killing, Rhonda Bowie, the details are different. She was stabbed multiple times, and her eyes were not removed. But the geography, the victimology, and later investigative insights made police see it as possibly the opening note of the same offender. When the 1990-1991 murders happened, the earlier case lit up in the files.
So where does that leave us? With a man, Charles Albright, arrested March 22, 1991. Tried later that year. Convicted for the murder of Shirley Williams and sentenced to life. He denied killing the women until he died in prison in 2020. The other murders remain officially unsolved on paper, even though the same name is written in the margin of each. And somewhere, the physical trophies, if they were kept, were never recovered.
That last point gives me a chill every time. It's like a horrible loose end in a drawer you can't open.
Okay, let's gently pivot to what we learn here, because otherwise we'll both sleep with the lights on. First, names matter. Say them. Remember them. Second, trust the people closest to the danger. The women on those streets knew a pattern before analysts did because they were watching with their lives on the line. Third, good police work is methodical listening. It's not always a profiler in a leather jacket. It's often a rookie with a notebook and an empathy that keeps the door from closing in her face.
And fourth, when you hear relatively unknown serial killer, don't assume small. Don't assume unimportant. These cases leave huge craters in specific communities, and only later does the rest of the world realize how big the blast was. Oak Cliff in the winter of 1990-91 was a city holding its breath, hoping the Knights would stop shouting.
That was poetic and a little grim, but true.
I've been told grim but true is our love language on this show.
It really is. Okay, last couple of beats before we close. If you're listening because you like the procedural angle, this is a landmark for another reason. It shows the boundary between older lab techniques and the dawn of DNA. A lot of arguments you hear now about the reliability of microscopic hair comparison, those were happening in Dallas in the early 1990s too. This case sits right on that fault line.
Which is one reason the debate around Albright's guilt on the untried counts remains interesting to lawyers and scientists, even apart from the horror of the facts. You can hold two ideas at once: that the crimes were so similar it's hard to imagine multiple offenders, and that some of the specific lab claims used in that courtroom weren't as strong as they sounded.
And you can still honor the names at the center. Mary Lou Pratt, Susan Beth Peterson, Shirley Williams. And you can remember Rhonda K. Bowie, whose case sits like a shadow at the edge of the file.
We say their names because they're the point. Not the man who became a grim headline. Not the nickname we both kind of hate. The women.
This story is not about a cursed place. It's about crimes that briefly held a place hostage and a community that pushed back.
And for our show, this marks the beginning of a series we'll weave in from time to time. Lesser-known serial offenders whose cases deserve careful attention and clear facts. We're not here to glorify. We're here to understand and remember.
Thank you so much for spending time with us today. You can probably hear in our voices that this one got under our skin. It should. Some stories should.
Thank you so much for joining us. Please like, follow, and subscribe. We really appreciate your support. It's goodbye from both of us. Take care of you.